Hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of the Intercompany Financial Management Insight Series, monthly discussions with intercompany leaders. My name is Prasad Tungaturthi, CPO at FourQ, the intelligent end-to-end solution for intercompany financial management. Today, I have the pleasure of chatting with another distinguished intercompany finance leader, Matt Glithero. He's the co-founder of Modern Industrial, a tactical consulting company in the digital leadership. Welcome, Matt. How are you doing?
Great. Thanks, Prasad. Really appreciate the time. Looking forward to the discussion and talking about intercompany, amongst other things, which is such an important topic for both of us.
Oh, we are glad to have you here in our series. See, you have a remarkable experience in leading and effectuating global finance transformation, and you've been at GE for 20 years. Can you, just for our audience, can you summarize the work you did for the last 20 years at GE, and what are you doing in the field today?
Absolutely. Yeah, well, I was really lucky that I learned transformation actually on the job. So over a period of about 15 years, I went through a series of roles, worked with a load of great people in different parts of the company, and learned all of the different aspects of transformation, digital enablement, and change management, which is the cornerstone of what we do. I started in operational finance. I was the CFO for one of the European businesses, one of the service businesses, and I was pulled out of my job to lead an ERP program for the first time, and then went through this series. I was fortunate enough to lead multiple ERP programs, global ones, Oracle and SAP, but then also got involved in building process excellence and finance IT teams. We did lots of M&A and restructuring work. And then the last 4 or 5 years, I was involved in a major restructuring and consolidation program within the power division, which was, a once in a lifetime opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Based on your experience in finance, processes and at multinational companies as complex as GE, what are the top challenges that you faced in making the systems or processes that could manage the intercompany complexity in a timely and efficient manner?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think firstly, I would say, if I think about intercompany, to me, it's one of the true critical processes. I think of it as being sort of the lifeblood of a company in terms of where it reaches, it feeds into most of your critical business processes, everything from project cost visibility, supply chain planning, back office transformation. They all have a touch point back into intercompany and how well that process works. For us at GE was tough. We had very, very complex business. The digital landscape was also, the ecosystem, if you like, was very complex, and therefore intercompany was a challenge. We had huge scale and complexity in the transactions, and that also had to be dealt with. So everything from, complex engineer to order products, all the way through to very simple field engineer transactions, and they all had to be accommodated, both in our digital infrastructure, business processes, but also through the intercompany flows. I would say, already touched on the critical dependency for business improvement. So I see that as being why it's an important thing to get right. But also, I think for companies like GE, the global nature of the business, we were operating in 110, 120 countries, and therefore local compliance and controllership is also something very challenging to deal with in that context. So what we called the last mile, those very specific requirements, how do you deal with them but still have globally automated and proficient business processes? And intercompany is one that is heavily affected by that as well.
Thank you. I can certainly appreciate the challenges that you faced. As we at FourQ, we deal with hundreds of vendors across the globe, and I know exactly what you're talking about. And for the next question, as you advise companies, with complex legal structures and systems that are, required to support their ops, what new challenges are on the horizon? What will the, global finance teams and the finance leaders need to tackle next?
Well, I think there's a couple of things. Obviously, working practices and the way that we operate in simple everyday life is changing rapidly with COVID. So, the offices and the touch points and remote working, that's obviously important. But I think the number one thing that our clients talk to us about, honestly, is the time to value. That is the number one concern. How quickly am I going to feel the benefit of an investment? And I think that's something that we work through very carefully. Our philosophy is, you need to still start with an enterprise architecture perspective, both from a business performance, but also from the underlying systems that will enable that. You have to start there and have a vision and a North Star that you're aiming for. But then I think what's changing and what's going to becoming more important is, how do you break that journey down into more bite-sized chunks where you can realize value quicker? I think the interchangeability of technology is becoming better, so that a single technology solution is less likely to be something that is the reality for companies. And therefore, there is an opportunity to set the North Star, align the business to where they want to go, but then break down the journey into these small bite-sized chunks. And that's something that we spend a lot of time on. The other thing, again, I think the nature of the last 10 years, but it's going to accelerate as we come out of COVID, from people I speak to, is more and more restructuring, M&A, and business change. And so how quickly you can bring a new division into your business, how quickly have you got the playbook to be able to quickly assimilate businesses into the company, or separate business operations as you restructure them, as you change them to meet your dynamic business environment. So I would say those are two definitely front and center for both CFOs, but also business leaders right now in general.
I know it's extremely challenging, and I can only imagine it getting harder after the COVID aftermath. So I understand what you're saying. Just to shift gears a little bit, let's talk about mergers and acquisitions, right? The Institute for Mergers and Acquisitions says that about 40 to 50,000 transactions are happening each year over the past decade with this merger activity. I mean, this trend of mergers and acquisitions demands that the newly acquired companies might have ERP systems and processes that have to be integrated, and you need to identify the overlap between the functions, and try to kind of integrate all the operations, right? So based on your experience, what are the critical success factors for managing this type of change in an M&A environment that we have today, and what advice you can provide to our audience today?
Absolutely. Well, look, I think the basics matter when you talk about M&A. So it starts with a clear vision. Why are we even undertaking the transaction? Is it clear about the value proposition? Is it measurable? Do you have alignment across the leadership team? And is it measurable? Not necessarily just the return on the investment, the one-time thing. The business performance indicators that are going to be improved through whatever activity you're taking place. We always start there. So clear vision, alignment of the leadership, set those performance goals. That's, to me, where you start. And we were lucky, if I think about the experience in GE, when we started one of the big transformations, we had that, with the supply chain integration of two supply chains. We had, CEO sponsorship on a weekly basis. We had a clear vision of what we were going to do with goals, and it made a real difference to that program. So I would say we start there. Maybe the other thing I would say with M&A is, in my experience, the due diligence process is always heavy on the synergy pro forma and the financial equation, and that's obviously super critical. Where I find that there's not as much work done up front is, what is the cost and effort that it's going to take to truly integrate the business after day one? And to me, that's the most important part, because that's what's going to drive the true realization of the investment, is the long-term integration of the two businesses. And therefore, we always recommend that to our clients, which is, make sure you have the guys that will own post day one long-term activities in those discussions, so that you can cost them out properly and plan for those activities. They often get missed.
No, that's really helpful. Thank you. Regarding how the ERPs are incorporated, right? So I have a question. So you have several ways of doing this, but regardless of how the ERPs are incorporated, how have you come to address the merger related issues with other critical systems like finance, HR, expenses, etc.?
Yeah, no, I think this is a big area, and I think it's continued to be a big area in terms of back office efficiency and how you scale large companies. I think the basic processes that you want to typically outsource or centralize, they lend themselves to the ERP functionality. They will accommodate those normally fairly easily in terms of the typical transactions. I think there's a couple of things. One, understanding what is truly differentiating. This is always a challenge for business, right? Are you really different? Are you unique? Or is this just a standard business process that is still critical in terms of how it works and the efficiency and the velocity of how the transaction works? So we always start there. We always start with that question. Try to adopt the industry standard, because these software companies will bring that. And most of these processes are pretty standard across most companies. I think where the experience that I had, the key question here is, when you go to a BPO type company, they will typically have a bespoke solution for how they want to run their transactions. Mm-hmm. And that can work very well, right? That is, but it's the trade-off between, do you integrate that into your ecosystem and maybe break some natural ERP connections that are there, versus do you take something with less sophistication that's more integrated? And that's the tough decision you have to work through. There are processes that work very well with third-party solutions integrated. Mm-hmm. And there are processes where, when you break the natural ERP integration, it does create downstream business challenges in those processes we talked about. Project management, project financials, supply chain planning. So those are decisions I think are really important. And then again, when I think shared services, typically you're talking multiple countries, large scale. And so always stand tax requirements was something I spent a lot of time at GE with. And I would say, best practice for me there is get ahead of those things very early. We always try to do 6 months in advance. We would try to consolidate them into groupings, because the challenge is that those last mile stat tax requirements in every country can really stop your standard automated process from working well. So the earlier you identify them, the more you can group them into clusters, the more chance you've got of accommodating them without dealing with all of the last mile complexity.
That makes sense. I know exactly what you're talking about. Everything happens in that, last mile of accounting. So let's shift gears a little bit here, right? So can artificial intelligence and machine learning help in accounting? Because, we are hearing that AI is applied in every other field, but we don't see a lot of it in accounting that is applied successfully. So do you see that AI and ML coming in a big way to accounting? Or
yeah, I mean, I think 100% it's one of the tools in the locker that you have to apply. I think in the new world that we talked about, where we're not necessarily going to go on a long monolithic journey, we're going to do a more agile, piecemeal approach to how we digitize in a coordinated way. Things like RPA is critical. I see the two things of, you start with, do I have visibility to what's going on? So do I have visibility to understand the level of performance I have in my business process and to see and spot the issues? Then you've got to have the right process to work through what's the right way to digitize those out, right? Is it the people? Is it the data? Or is it the process? And if you need to do a major uplift in terms of technology, that's a long-term thing. And RPA, we did many, many examples of great RPA solutions that could come in with a very targeted, specific issue and digitize that. And they can be long-term solutions, or they can be a bridge until you actually upgrade a more holistic business process / pillar application. So there's loads of them. I mean, I think the key though is For example, I've seen great examples of very basic business processes like running reports that take a long time, moving data from one's place to another, very manually intensive items that seem simple, but actually behind them is maybe going to take quite a while to actually truly control. And therefore, a very pointed RPA solution, I think, can work very well.
So another forward-looking topic, right? Continuous accounting. I mean, you must have heard of it, right? It's being mentioned a lot these days. And, we did something called, continuous accounting. I mean, we're looking at FourQ to do this in the future. And also in my past lives at Oracle, we did something called autonomous consolidation. So a lot of it, revolves around, instead of waiting for the month end and the quarter end and the year end, and then start collecting data and on a time crunch, on a deadline, you could be doing accounting all through the year, every day. As soon as the data comes in, you kind of, reconcile. But is this something that's going to be a reality ever? Because it's not as easy, as it sounds.
No, I think it's a really good topic. So when I think of continuous accounting, I think accounting transaction is an expression. It's a finance expression of typically a business process, right? Transaction. So if you want to do that, and it should be the goal, right? We've all lived in businesses where the hockey stick, everything happens at the end, and you can never, that is not sustainable in terms of business process excellence, closing cycle. All of those things are not sustainable. They're not world class. But the only way you can really address it is at the source. And at the source is to understand your business process, get your accounting right first time at the time it happens. And that's much harder to fix. Those are things that require you to lean before you digitize, with cross-functional teams truly looking at what's happening throughout the cycle of that business process, and make sure that the people, the data, and then ultimately the accounting get corrected at the time they happen. And I think it's never going to be 100% happening real time. But I think if you live in a business world where 80% happens in the last week of the quarter, wouldn't it make a huge impact if you could get 80% happening during the quarter? And I think that should be the goal.
Okay, so let's move on to our lightning round. Just react to the following questions in just a few sentences. There's no right or wrong answer. So the first question, the vision of one ERP serving all entities across a multinational may sound, good in theory, and, it may look good in PowerPoint, but is it sound? Is it economically feasible, or is it even possible?
I mean, it's the holy grail. It's still the ultimate goal for most companies. And if you get there, the companies we see that get to that point, they generate huge benefits. They see it on a scale, and that's fantastic. I think, like we've already talked, though, that the reality for most companies is they will never get there. It's not feasible to have huge monolithic long cycle programs where the business environment is so dynamic. And so again, I think what we've done at Modern Industrial, we really take an approach that you do the upfront work, you set the vision, you know where you want to go, and that's orchestrated upfront. But then you have more flexibility to be nimble with using the right timing, the right technology for the right purpose, and doing it at a time that's going to have maximum value. It's not easy to do, but I think that is going to be more the norm. So consolidating over time to much fewer, more simpler enterprise architecture is the goal. Whether you can get to one, not many companies get there.
What is the toughest aspect of conquering closing cycle time in a complex organization?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of factors like we just talked about, because finance is the expression of what's happened before. And so, however, depending on what business operations you have, you see all the sins of the quarter show up in the close. Okay. But I think going back to intercompany, to me, that is one for big companies, multinationals with lots of footprint, complexity. Intercompany is crucial. You'll never have a great closing process unless you have a good intercompany solution, process, ownership, and data. And that's not easy, but I think that's definitely one of the cores. And we struggled with, in many places I work, we struggled to do that. It was a limiting factor in terms of the efficiency of the close. Again, we talked about getting the accounting right up front. That has a huge play on the closing cycle. You can have the best people and the best consolidation systems in the world. If you're spending days moving transactions from left pocket to right pocket because of your chart of accounts complexity or your lack of discipline in your business transactions, very, very tough to have a great automated close. So again, I think it's a lot of things we've already touched on.
Do you ever see the human element going away from accounting?
No, and I've been through many cycles on this. I think there is a very important balance between efficiency, specialization of putting people together that have a specialized domain expertise, centralizing and outsourcing. They've all got a place in modern companies, but also business partnering, being close to the nature of the transaction, being close to the operations is crucial in running a good company. And therefore, you've got to strike the balance between the two. The better that your, processes, your underlying systems are, the more value added the team can be in finance. And that's obviously the goal. The less after the fact accounting, reorganizing transactions and reporting what happened. Nobody wants to do that, and that's the non-value added. The trick is, how do you free them up, and how do you give them more a value added role in driving improvement, which finance to me has always been the glue in many companies that is able to, if they've got capacity and the tools, they play a huge role in business partnering and driving a company forward.
Okay, now time for some fun, right? So this is not about the subject, because I know accounting is not exactly is fun for a lot of people, but it's got to be done. So somebody has to do it. So after working on global financial transformation at GE for decades, what accomplishment that you're most proud of?
Yeah, we have many wins. We had many tough lessons. I mean, we had some very tough periods when you learn as much, probably more through that than you do from the wins. But I think I would start with wherever I've been. Most of my career was with GE, but not all of it. It's really the people, building the teams, being part of a team. I would say being part of a cross-functional team was one of the most fulfilling parts of my career, was not being in an accounting group, but being a business leader that happened to be in finance, but worked with engineering and sourcing and services and IT and all the functions. That to me was very rewarding. I met some great people. I was part of great teams, and I was able to build great teams. And so that would be number one. We had some great wins. I think, digitizing one of GE's flagship manufacturing sites has to be one of them. I mean, it was working on it was the leading edge technology in terms of its field of operation, and yet it was working and being supported on a 40-year-old mainframe system. And that was such an amazing experience. And it was supported by the CEO, and it was with a clear mission. And so that would be one. Maybe another one I would say was we helped facilitate the creation of a global service business across 13,000 engineers in a rapid deployment across less than 3 years to do that, working with the CEO and his team to enable him to bring together 3 distinct businesses in that very short space of time. Through digital enablement was the enabler for him to do that, and we saw that was a huge accomplishment. It was a real once in a lifetime. So, lots of other things, some tough experiences that we take into our thought process now. They're just as important on how to do things better, but some great times and some real good experiences.
Thank you. Okay, so for the second fun question, right? I know that, you probably always wanted to be an accountant and be in a transformational leader in accounting systems. But if you were given a second chance at choosing a career, what would you choose as your career?
There's a great question. So, and there's many potential answers. I guess from a professional perspective, I had I thought about surveying, and I remember as a sort of pre-university had a mindset of surveying, quantity surveying, sort of the mix of office and practical application was something we looked at early. As I've got older, it would definitely be more something to mix work-life balance with cooking or wine growing or something that's a little bit more fun than maybe that.
Yes.
But, in the end, I was really lucky that I spent a lot of time in finance, but also business operations, working on continuous improvement and process. And I think it's something I really enjoy. And so I've got certainly no regrets on that.
Thank you. Thank you, Matt. That's all the questions we have for today. And, it's a fun session. It was really pleasure, chatting with you. And we hope to see you again on our, Insight series, one day in the future about a different topic or, the same topic. And thank you for your time. I truly appreciate your time and have a great day. Thank you.
Brilliant. Great. Thanks, Prasad. Been a pleasure.